You pretty much summarized it. Read the contracts before you sign. That's that's probably 95% of what you should know. Everything above that is gravy. All right, so we're going to do this little contracts primer here. I'm assuming, sure someone will tell me if they can't see the screen. First thing, of course, the very uninteresting things that no one cares about. This is me. I'm an attorney at Saxton Stump in Lancaster. I was solo for 15 years. Started here just a couple of months ago. I do mostly patent and trademark work, but of course you can't really do any sort of business work without having some experience with contracts. Now, the contracts are probably, probably the first real body of law. A contract is basically just a promise. So, as soon as there have been people making promises, there's been people breaking promises. So the contracts, that whole body of law tries to control that. In law school, I think contracts is always going to be a first year class, and it usually lasts a full year, just because there's thousands of years of law to try to pick up on and learn. But really, a lot of it comes down to it's almost intuitive. And you make a promise, you try to stick to it. If people did that, we really wouldn't need lawyers. And the thing with contracts is they're constantly changing. Sometimes the law changes. Most of the time, there's just new things that come up that contracts have to adjust for. If you're familiar with the show 𝗬𝗓𝗏 in Cincinnati, and there's a number of other shows, old Saturday Night Live, for years there've been a push to get them put on DVD. But like with 𝗬𝗓𝗏, there was a lot of music used during the show, and the contracts at the time just allowed for broadcast rights. So now if anyone wants to put out a DVD, they have to find the artist, find who's now managing their catalog, and try to get them to sign on to grant greater rights to DVD sales. And that's almost impossible to do. I mean, they've been trying, but it's been 40 years, and I don't think it's going to really go anywhere. Anyway, you've got my name and phone number. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Here's just basically what we're going to touch on. What's a contract, why you need them, whether I'm necessary, what you can and can't negotiate, how you get out of a contract, how you stop people from getting out of contracts. And then we'll touch just a little bit on non-competes, because that's always a hot topic when you're talking to business people. Okay, now contracts, people seem to think contracts need to be formal. They don't. You're perfectly fine. An oral contract is perfectly enforceable. It's just a lot harder to prove what was said. The written contract, of course, it's all written. You can go through and make sure that everyone's agreeing to the same thing. Like I said, contracts are all just sort of a, an agreement of what you're going to do. It's a quid pro quo, tit for tat. You're entering into contracts every day, and you probably don't even realize it. That's everything from just ordering lunch. Like you go, you order what you want, you get the food, you pay for it. That's a type of contract. Other times there's more sort of informal or implied contracts. Like, you take someone out for lunch, there's sort of an implied contract that they're probably going to buy you lunch next, or maybe you're hoping it leads to some other kind of business or something. So it doesn't really even have to be an explicit contract where people realize what they're doing. Just saying you'll do something for something else is an enforceable contract. Now, there are some elements to contracts that really make it official, and most of these are also pretty intuitive. There has to be an offer. You have to say, I'll do this for you. And then the other side says, okay, that sounds good. That's the acceptance. Assent basically means that you both understand what's being agreed to. No one's really sneaking in something, trying to trick you. You can't sign a contract, or at least you can't be held to a contract that's in like a language you don't understand. That just wouldn't make sense. Consideration means there's some sort of usually money exchange. I'll do this for 20 bucks. The other side says, okay, that sounds good. Here's the 20 bucks. That's the consideration. It doesn't always have to be money. It can be another promise. It can be a token amount of money. This just needs to be some sort of back and forth. Now, of course, contracts, you have to have the capacity to enter a contract. Normally what that means is you're old enough. You typically, except in California, with some of the underage actors contracts, usually you have to be 18 or above to make a contract. That's why we were all able to get out of the Columbia House cassette or CD club when we were in high school. And you write them a letter, you say, I was 16 when I did this. You can't hold me to the contract. Stop bothering me. And similarly, you can't really make a contract if there's some issue that interferes with what you can understand about the agreement. Of course, contracts have to be legal, which is kind of a funny thing, because contracts, you can certainly enter into an illegal contract. It's fine to enter a contract with a hitman. But the thing is, if the one side breaches, you really can't take it to court. So there's not a whole lot of point about even having the contract there. Now, notice that writing isn't a factor. Like I said before, you don't need anything in writing, but it sure helps if you ever have to go back and try to prove someone said something or not. In fact, a big thing right now is contract by email. A lot of the times I'll contract with someone and we don't even bother sending like a real contract for them to look at and sign. It's just in an email. I say, okay, I will do this for you. The cost is going to be this much. The other side comes back and says, okay. Or I'll say something like, I'm going to work on this project and file this patent for you. And if that's okay with you, we'll just count your paying the bill as you're agreeing to it. So, whatever the parties can agree on is a contract. Now, of course, it's good to have things in writing. When it's black and white, you can always refer back and see what you both agreed on. Contracts really let you manage expectations, right? You have assurances about what the one side is going to do and things like how you're going to get paid. And if they break their promise, you can take them to court to enforce the contract. Contracts can also be freely amended at any time you want, which is something a lot of people don't realize. If something comes up and the two parties can agree to make a change, they can make whatever change you want. So like, let's say you're in a contract and you're going to deliver 20 sandwiches every second Tuesday for some business lunch. Okay. If the company hires some more hungry people and they say, we need to increase that to 30, you don't have to break the contract. You don't have to get another contract signed. You can just say in an email, okay, we'll amend the contract for now. So that's 30 people. Okay. And then that's a perfectly fine written amendment to a contract. And if later on that changes back to 20, you can amend the contract again. If they decide they want soup and salad and that's something you can do, fine. You just make that adjustment. You don't even have to do a formal amendment. You can just say, okay, this month we'll do that, and then we'll go back to the way things usually work. Or you play it by ear. It can be as loose or as formal as the two parties need. Okay, now, I'm sorry. One good thing about contracts I didn't mention is that it helps you plan. You're pretty sure about what's going to happen in the future if you do this. So you can put things into the contract about, when I do something, how long is it going to be till I'm paid? How am I going to be paid? What are you going to deliver, and what time do I have to pay you? So these are all things that let you kind of plan out how things are going to go down the line. Now, do you need contracts? Yes. You need contracts for businesses to, like I said, to plan out how things are going to go, to have some idea of how things are supposed to go. Now, do you need a lawyer? No. Well, sometimes, maybe, depends. A lot of times, I mean, if you've been to Staples or OfficeMax, they have like a whole little shelving unit of form contracts you can buy. And it's just fill in the blank. And honestly, they're not that bad. A lot of times they're fine. I've actually sent people to go buy them if it's really what they needed. Now, in business, I'm sure a lot of you are LLCs, probably a good portion of single member or maybe 2-member LLCs. A lot of times for that, you don't really need an operating agreement. For a single member LLC, you never need an operating agreement because you're the only party. You can't really have much of a debate or a conflict with yourself about how you're going to get things done. But sometimes I've had clients who have taken their single member LLC to a bank to try to open up an account, and the bank will want to see their formation records and will even want to see an operating agreement. So in that case, I said, just go to OfficeMax, buy a blank operating agreement for $9, fill it out. If it's horrible, if it doesn't do what you need it to, it doesn't matter because it's only you. You're never going to use a single member operating agreement against yourself. A lot of times, if you really just need a simple vendor agreement, the form is going to be okay. I'll tell you a secret, lawyers use forms too. I have books of forms. Other people here have forms. If I need to do something, first thing I'm going to do is find someone who practices in that field and say, hey, do you have a contract for this? Do you have some language I can insert into my stock agreement form that's going to cover some problem that might come up in the future? Now, of course, the big difference with having an attorney draft your contract or look over your contract versus doing it yourself is, hopefully I'm going to be able to identify problems that you might not, or figure out what kind of issues could come up and see if they're really being addressed in the contract or not. So, it's a balance. Whether or not you need to hire a lawyer for your contract, it depends on how important the contract is. Like if we're back to the thing where you're delivering 20 sandwiches a month, if that contract gets thrown aside, if the other party breaches and calls and tells you, we're firing you, we're never going to eat your sandwiches again, or if they're a week late paying you or just refuse to pay you, if the 20 sandwiches isn't critical, you probably don't need a lawyer to draft the contract. Now, if it's a huge catering event and you need to buy equipment and a bunch of supplies that you normally wouldn't, then it makes a little bit more sense to hire an attorney to look over your contract or draft something, a custom contract for you. Plus, I have bills too. I need to eat, so I really can't have everyone doing all their own legal work. But like I said, a lot of times, this is stuff you can handle, with the help of a form book. There's also lots of places online that will sell you form contracts. LegalZoom, I'm not a huge fan because a lot of times they'll also screw things up. But again, if it's not critical, if it's not a system critical thing, and you just want a contract so that you've got some memorialization of how things are supposed to go, it's not the worst thing you can do. Buying a form isn't the worst thing. Negotiations. Negotiations, you can always negotiate part of the contract. Okay, almost always. If for the sandwiches, the other side wants 10 roast beef, 10 turkey, and you were able to get turkey on sale. So you figure, well, how about we do all turkey this week? It's a negotiation. If you get everyone to agree, great. Of course, you can't agree on anything illegal, but like famously, Van Halen in their concert writer used to have that there would be a big bowl of M&Ms backstage with all the brown ones removed. The other side agrees to it, suddenly that's a contract. If you're Van Halen and it's a bowl and there's brown M&Ms, it's within your contractual rights to bail. The other side breached, you don't have to go along with the contract anymore. Another thing really big, contracts for professional athletes. A lot of times there'll be a clause in there saying they can't play the game in the off season, or they can't, play touch football if they want at a family picnic, or they can't do any sports because the risk of injury is too great. Now, Michael Jordan, of course, he was in a different position. He was able to negotiate I think they called it a love of the sport clause, where he got that removed from his contract, so he could play pickup basketball whenever he wanted, just because he wanted to. And he was Michael Jordan, so he could, of course, pretty much get anything he wanted in the contract. And of course, negotiations, depending on what you want, there might be some more consideration needed. You have to increase how much you're paying the other side if you're asking for something weird, or more than what the other party wants to give up, and the other party is going to want something in return. This really comes to kind of either the offer acceptance or assent part of the contract components, depending on how you look at it. There's also something called a contract of adhesion, which used to be a much bigger thing. A contract of adhesion is when you really need a contract for something. Like you really need the 20 sandwiches a month contract, and so the other side presents you with something absurd and says, here, you can take it or leave it. Either you're doing the 20 sandwiches and you're providing free soup and drinks, or you don't get the business at all. If there's no room for negotiation, it's called a contract of adhesion, and normally those are supposed to be unenforceable. Practically speaking, that's really been eaten away. Because we sign so many contracts of adhesion. Every time you download something, or if you go to a website, you go to a website and there's some agreement they want you to look at, or you agree to have, you agree to accept cookies. Those are all contracts of adhesion. You can either accept the contract or not. And so now, if it comes up, courts really take it as more of a case-by-case basis. If the contract of adhesion is something that is really necessary for things to be streamlined and continue to work the way we want them to work, they're usually allowed. Or if it's something that's fairly minor, like you tell Apple you're not going to try to reverse engineer their product, when you click OK, that's something that's not a big deal. If it's a contract of adhesion where you're really giving up the right to sue for bodily injury, that's something that's going to be looked at a little bit more critically. Breach, that's when one side doesn't go along with what you agreed to. Like I said, you're always free to make amendments, but amendments are something both sides have to want. One side just decides to back out or change something, that's breach. And it doesn't really matter if it's purposeful or not. We can have consequences either within the contract or without the contract. Without the contract being like, if someone breaches the contract, you can take them to court. You can sue them and say, here's the contract, he signed it, he didn't do this, he's got to make it right. typically what a court will do if you can prove your case is award you contract damages, which is really just what you actually lost. So with the 20 sandwiches, you don't get paid, you're probably going to be able to recover the profit you would have made on the 20 sandwiches. Chances are you're not going to be able to recoup the profit you would have made on the next 12 months of sandwiches, because that's speculative. We don't know what could have happened in that 12 months. You could have gone out of business, or the contract could have been canceled for other reasons. So you're not going to get things like the pain and suffering for contract damages. You're also probably not going to be able to force the other party to go along with what they agreed to. Okay, so if the agreement says you're going to come do 20 sandwiches a month for the next 3 months, and then after 1 month they back out, you're not going to be able to say, no, you still have to hire me for the next 2 months. There might be actual monetary damages you can recover for that lost business, but the court's not going to make some other party actually do something other than write you a check most of the time. Sometimes, if it's like a sale agreement for something super rare that couldn't be replaced, a court might order what's called a specific performance in that case. Usually not. So often when we're doing a contract, we'll put in some sort of like a liquidated damages clause to give the contract a little bit more teeth. To say like, if you breach and we sue and win, you have to pay our attorney fees, which are often going to be a lot more than your profit off of 20 sandwiches. Or we'll put in something like, if you breach or you do this, you have to pay us this amount. We all agree that this contract has a value of $250,000. If you breach, if you don't do one of these things, you just owe us $250,000. It doesn't matter what our actual damages were, because we've agreed to that in the contract. And then you get something like that. It's a little bit more, it makes more sense to spend the money to take a contract before a court. Enforcement, like I said, try to avoid having to enforce a contract because it's expensive. You can usually only get contract damages. You're usually not going to be able to get specific performance. That's where the other side has to actually carry through and do what they said they were going to do. Liquidated damages clauses are great. They make people really think twice about violating a contract, and the same goes for lawyer fees, because that's a barrier. A lot of times, the courts would be packed if people could afford lawyers, and it's I hate saying this, but that's true. A lot of disputes I have between two people, are things that we just have to come down and try to talk through, because I tell my client, it's going to be, we're going to have to pay a retainer of maybe $20,000 to get this started. And then, the litigation might go on for a year. You could be in $100,000. Is that really worth it to make $5,000 back? And so a lot of times people are kind of able to get away with things, with getting out of contracts, because it's too expensive to enforce. So that's why we put in these liquidated damages clauses and stipulate that the losing party has to pay attorney fees, because then, they've really got some skin in the game. Now, restrictive covenants, because this comes up a lot, especially with business owners. You have an employee and that employee leaves, and the employee, sets up his own business competing with you, or joins your competitor, and they're poaching clients of yours. These are all things we want to take care of before they happen. And we do that with restrictive covenants. That's where they're called restrictive covenants. Covenant just being a promise. Restrictive, we're restricting what the other side's going to do. Usually, to be most enforceable, these are the kind of things you have people sign when they're hired. Okay, you can often do it after they're hired, depending on where you are, what the contract involves. You might have to pay them a kicker or, attach it to something else to make the contract stick. So, if possible, we want to do this as soon as they're hired. Now, a non-compete, and that's where someone quits, we say they can't directly compete with us for the next 3 months or 6 months or something like that. Or you can't go into the same business within 10 miles of your former employer. Now, of course, businesses, they always want to make this as onerous as possible. Like, if you quit or are fired, you can't work in the same industry ever, anywhere. And no one's going to enforce that. And these restrictive covenants, if it comes down to it, you still have to take them to court to get someone to comply. And the court's just not going to be that restrictive on someone's way of life. So you really have to think about what kind of restrictions you actually need to protect yourself, okay? Non-competes are to protect the business, not to harm the former employee. So this is something where you probably actually want to talk to an attorney to make sure that what you want to do is something that's going to be upheld. Usually, if you're fairly reasonable, said you want someone to stay out of direct competition for a few months or 6 months or a year, that's fine. It depends on a lot of things, how important the employee was, and what kind of job it is. If you're running a restaurant, and your waiter quits, chances are you're not going to have a huge amount of luck enforcing a restrictive covenant, because, well, not to talk down to waiters, of course, but it's not a super skilled job. The person can go anywhere and do the same type of work. They're really not going to be taking business away from you if they go work down the street. Okay. On the other hand, if it's a highly specialized person who's really only, there's maybe only a handful of businesses in the county or state that are in the same market. If that person leaves, it's more of a problem if they go into direct competition with you. Pennsylvania is what we call a blue pencil state. So if there is a restrictive covenant and a judge looks at it and thinks, this is crazy, you can't do that. You can't prevent someone from working in the state for the next 5 years. The judge can strike that down and say, well, instead of anywhere in the state for 5 years, we're going to say any place within 20 miles that's in competition for the next 6 months. So the judge will work with you. Other states, if you try a really restrictive covenant, they'll just knock it out and that's it. You're stuck. You don't get any covenant. So they can set up business and directly compete down the street from you. So, you always want to keep that in mind. Non-solicitation, that's of course when someone leaves and they take your list of vendors, or they take your list of customers with them, and they start calling all of your customers saying, I know you love the work I did for them there. Now I'm with this new firm and we're doing a much better job. That is something that a court is going to look less kindly on. They're big in helping you secure non-solicitation rights, because again, that's something that's protecting the employer. It's not really harming the employee. So they don't want employees being able to just take your customers or your trade secrets and start applying them wherever they want. But again, these are all things you want to have up front as soon as you hire people. If someone's with you for a year, the relationship is starting to break down, and then you try to sneak in a non-solicitation clause as part of some sort of like annual employment contract review, it may or may not be enforceable. Same with the trade secrets. It depends on the state and what it is you're trying to protect. And these are things where you probably want to, might to hire a lawyer is going to be up on the state-specific case law to really help you get through this. That was a tidy half hour. Much better than the last one of these I did on intellectual property law, which I think ran over. And like I said, feel free to give me an email, shoot me an email if you have questions, or give me a call. I'm happy to, free consultations or whatever I can to help with SCORE clients. Now, I can't really take you on as clients, but I can, do whatever I can and, hopefully guide you towards someone who could help you if that's needed. Let's see. Are there any questions? I think this is a meeting, so I haven't heard anyone. Maybe that's just been because I've been talking too fast. But any questions? Anything come up?
Yeah, Steve, this is Lynn.
Hey, Lynn.
So I had a client who is an inventor, and he's been talking to me somewhat about contracts, and he says what he's doing now is using AI to come up with contracts. So, he'll type in, I want a contract for blah, 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 and he'll see what chatbot returns to him. So this is a whole new world now, and I'm just interested in what you think about that. Is
that's not so bad. I know some attorneys who are doing that. What the AI is doing is just finding all the contracts it can, reading them, and see what kind of fits together, what other people in similar situations have used as their contracts. So it's not that much different from buying a form book or getting one of those forms from Office Max. The thing is, it's maybe not as good as getting the form from Office Max, because you're really not sure how good the contracts are that the AI has been reading, or if a lot of the clauses make sense for what you're doing. There was a case maybe 2 months ago. It was out of Texas. I forget what kind of litigation was going on, but the attorneys on one side had chat AI write a memo for them, or write a motion to the court, a brief for the court that was summarizing some case law. And they got it. It looked good, so they submitted it to the court. Turns out that the chatbot made up a lot of the case law it was citing. So the brief would mention a lot of binding case law that just didn't exist, and just because it made the argument better. And of course, the judge figured this out when he went to look up some of the cases, and it's a mess. It's been the hottest topic in legal circles for the last couple months, is what you can really do with AI, and how much reliance you can put on it. And I'm sure it's going to get better quickly, but right now, it's a first draft. I wouldn't give it any more, credence than a first draft that, a law student came up with.
Okay. Thank you.
Or, if you bought, if you downloaded a contract from some, unknown website that just lists contracts, which I know I've been on some of those, are just lots of contract repositories. You can either find form language or, full contracts to download. And, the trick is knowing, if they're good or not. And that's, hard for most people to know.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Like I said, a lot of times, it doesn't, a lot of times, depending on what the contract's for, if it's not a good contract, if there's huge errors in it that will make it unenforceable, it might not really matter. Again, it just depends on what you need the contract for. If it's a huge deal, you want to spend more effort and time and money on making sure that it's as airtight as you can make it. if it's for, if it's, a brand new business you just launched and you just want to make sure that you can buy forks at a decent price, a form contract might not be the worst thing. Again, just to memorialize what the two parties agree on, so that if there is a question, you can go back and look at it and say, see, I said I was going to do this. I did this. Why haven't you done that? So even if it's not something you can really rely on in court, as long as you have some sort of memorialization, that might be all you need. And anyone else? Okay, well, I've got a one sheet I can send out about some contract things that someone else in the firm created, but I don't know if I can get everyone's email address, or I'm not sure. If you want this contract one sheet, send me an email and I'll send it out to you.
Steve,
Yes.
This is Steve Engel, the host. I will send a list of the participants to you, so you will have their emails.
Okay, then I'll send that out to everyone just so you have it. And like I said, I'm happy to answer questions or try to point you towards the solution you need. So just let me know.